It wasn't just another day in court. It was the day the Brown family came apart forever. The courtroom was not big, but it seemed to be holding the weight of the world. Each and every one of them, from the judge to the bailiff, from the reporters squashed into the back row to the relatives seated at the front, could sense it. That crushing, smothering tension. It was no whisper of paper shifting or the old wooden benches creaking. It was something more weighty. The sort of silence that lives, crams itself against your breast, and chokes the breath from your lungs. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed quietly, bathing the room in a cold, unforgiving light. Shadows lingered in the corners, and the air was stagnant, as if no one had been brave enough to open a window in hours. A hint of old wood and coffee wafted from the bench of the judge, but was overwhelmed by the smell of nervousness, sweat, perfume, and terror, all mixed into something almost intolerable. Cameras flashed, every strobe slicing through the silence like a knife. The tap of a pen on a notebook sounded impossibly louder than it had to be. In the rear, someone coughed, abruptly squelched by the glacial stare of a court officer. And the double doors opened. He was here, Kody Brown. He moved slowly into the room, not hurrying, not tarrying, but with an unnatural stiffness to his movement. The sort of gait that was reserved for someone exerting control over every fiber. His hair was well coiffed, his suit immaculate, his jaw shaved. To the unfamiliar eye, he could have appeared self-assured. But his eyes explained otherwise. They darted, not wildly, but searching, measuring, calculating who was in the room, who was watching, who might be for him, and who was against him. There was a faint redness around them, not enough to say he'd been crying, but enough to hint that he hadn't slept. He passed by the reporters first, cameras drawn, lenses zooming, fingers firing shutter buttons repeatedly. A thrust microphone and a hiss of a question. "Kody, do you have anything to say before the hearing?" He did not respond. His jaw clenched, and he continued walking. And then he saw them. To the left side of the courtroom, sitting together, were Christine, Janelle, and Meri. The three women who had been his wives, now standing together not as wives, but as witnesses. Their faces were white but firm, the sort of resolve that had been constructed brick by brick over years of pain and disillusionment. Christine's lips were pinched firmly together, her hands clasped together in her lap, but her eyes never wavered from Kody's. There was no softness in them now, no hint of the woman who once believed him unquestioningly. Janelle sat next to her, slouching back in the chair with her arms crossed over her stomach. She didn't shift in her seat. She didn't blink frequently. Her face was cooler, tighter, but if you caught a glimpse, you could see the strain of her jaw, how her hands clutched at her elbows like she was holding herself together. Meri. She was more difficult to read. Her hands were on the table in front of her, fingers linked together, eyes lowered for an instant as if in prayer. But when she did look up, there was a Kody pulled out his chair at the defense table, slowly extracting it with purpose. He sat, adjusted his tie, and looked toward the judge. The judge, a stooping man with deep creases on his face, adjusted his spectacles and looked around the room. His gaze rested momentarily upon the crowd before falling back upon the papers before him. He cleared his throat, grasped his gavel, and the sound that echoed was crisp and decisive. Bang! Flicker of something jagged there. Not anger precisely, but something denser. Something years in the making, and now finding its spot in this moment. And then there was Robyn. She was by herself on the other side of the room. No sisters, no friends. Her dark long hair surrounded her white face, and her eyes were puffy, the skin underneath them red and swollen from tears. She held in her hands one photograph, its corners creased, its surface smudged from being gripped so tightly. She wasn't gazing at Kody still. Her eyes were trained on the photo in her hand, as if allowing her gaze to drift elsewhere would break her in two. Her thumb would occasionally graze the face, a languid, automatic movement, the kind humans do when they're attempting to cling to something they realize they're going to lose. The people in the audience were silent. No one spoke. Even the normal low hums that pervade a courtroom before court started were absent. The tension wasn't only in the air, It was in the bones of the building. The trial commenced. But before one word was ever said, something lingered in the air. The sense that this was not going to be just another court fight. This was not going to be another day when individuals hurled charges and courtroom speak filled the air. This was going to be the day the truth emerged. Gritty, unedited, and irrevocable. And every person in that room knew when it happened, the Brown family would never be the same. The judge rustled a couple of sheets, his eyes running over the list of witnesses. Then his voice boomed out, steady but authoritative. The court calls Christine Brown to the stand. A gentle murmur spread throughout the room. Christine's chair creaked against the floor when she stood up. She didn't hurry. Her steps were slow, deliberate, the type of gait you adopt when you've been carrying a heavy secret for far too long and you're finally willing to release it. Her heels tapped on the fine wooden floor, every click ringing out across the taut silence. She walked to the witness stand, laid her left hand on the Bible, and lifted her right. "Do you swear to tell the truth? The whole truth? And nothing but the truth?" the clerk said. "I do," Christine said firmly but softly. She sat down cautiously, readjusting the microphone. Her gaze went straight to Kody, not to the judge, not to the jury, but to the man she once loved. The man she had defended for so long. The father of her children. Her voice was at first gentle, almost delicate. "For years, I thought he was the best. I supported him. I advocated for him, even when others said I shouldn't." Kody leaned forward in his chair, his fingers pressed tightly together in his lap. Christine's tone became more forceful. "I told myself he was doing his best. That perhaps he was just drowning. That perhaps he didn't notice the pain. But the thing is, he did. He noticed. And he decided to ignore it." Her eyes shone, but she didn't glance away. She breathed deeply, then said the words that hit like a stone in still water. "We lost Garrison, and some of that is on him." The room went cold. Kody's face contorted. A flicker of something, anger or sadness. It was difficult to say. The reporters toward the back sat forward, their pens scratching wildly across their notepads. Christine went on, her voice shaking now, but still biting. "He was our son. He needed his father. But when Garrison called out, Kody was more concerned about defending his pride than defending his own child." A soft gasp came from the gallery somewhere. Christine gazed down for a moment, her hands intertwining together in her lap. She raised her head once more, her eyes fixed on Kody's with a ferocity that forced him finally to look away. "You may speak of leadership all day," she told him, her voice cold now. "But true leaders don't leave their family behind. They don't leave their children to battle their wars without them." When Christine resigned, the silence was thicker than ever before. The judge cleared his throat. "The court calls Janelle Brown." Janelle rose, her face inscrutable. She didn't falter, didn't hesitate. Her vow was swift, her walk to the stand unflinching. She fiddled with the microphone but didn't so much as glance Kody's way immediately. Instead, she addressed the jury. "I won't recite everything Christine said," she started, "because she is right, every single word." At last, her eyes fell on Kody and her voice took on an edge. "He says he's a leader, a man of faith, one who sacrifices for his family. But the truth? The sacrifices were never his. He took, and we gave, and when we had nothing left to give, he left." Kody's face grew narrow, but he kept his lips clamped together. Janelle inched forward in her seat, speaking low so that the jury had to lean in order to hear her. "And now, he's going to stand here and say he's not responsible? I'm not going to let him rewrite this story. We all experienced it. We all know the truth." When she left the stand, she didn't glance at Kody once. The defense attorney jotted some words on a piece of notepaper, but Kody remained seated, his hands clenched around the edge of the table so hard that his knuckles were white. The judge looked down at his documents once more, then spoke in that calm, deliberate voice that had the whole courtroom in tension. "The court calls Robyn Brown." All eyes in the room turned. Robyn moved slowly, almost as if she was wading through water. She gripped the photo more tightly in her hands, her knuckles white, the corners of the image warping with pressure. She didn't glance at Kody. She didn't glance at Christine, Janelle, or Meri. Her eyes remained fixed on that one photograph, as if it was the only thing keeping her from shattering. She climbed to the witness stand and was sworn in, her words a mere whisper. She sat down and took a deep breath, the kind you do when you are about to dive headfirst into something you know will hurt. The room held its breath. Even the scratch of pens was silent. Robyn's voice shook initially. I didn't want to testify today. I didn't want to be here at all. But there's something everyone needs to know. She raised the photo so the jury could view it. It was Garrison, grinning in a candid shot, his hair mussed, his eyes gleaming with that youthful vigor that seemed trapped in the picture forever. Her thumb touched the surface once more before she flipped it over. In careless script on the back were the words that caused the entire courtroom to lean forward. I wish you had been there for me, Dad. There was a mutter from the crowd. A pen from a reporter fell from her hand and clattered to the floor, echoing. Robyn's voice broke, but she continued. I begged him to call. I begged him to try. I told him Garrison needed him, but he didn't want to hear it. She paused, her lips quivering. It wasn't because he didn't care. At least that's what I told myself. It was because he was too busy protecting his pride, too busy holding grudges, too busy proving a point. Her eyes finally lifted, straight to Kody. And now, Garrison's gone. And all the pride in the world won't bring him back. Kody blinked hard, as though attempting to absorb the words, but his face had turned pale. His hands, still on the table, curled into small fists. Robyn's voice became softer, almost whispery. I thought I knew him better than anybody. I used to stand up for him when nobody else would. But now I realize what they've been telling me all along. She set the photo face up on the witness stand, allowing the jury one more glimpse of Garrison's smile before she descended. She walked past Kody's table, not stopping. She never looked in his direction. She walked directly past, her shoulders trembling, and sat back down, still by herself. The courtroom was now different, heavy. No one shifted for what seemed like several seconds, as though they were all fearful that any noise would shatter whatever tenuous impetus was holding the emotion together. Even the judge paused a little longer than normal before addressing words once more. Hours had elapsed. The witness stand testimonies had concluded, yet the remnants of each testimony continued to hang in the air like wisps of smoke after fire. The jury was dismissed. The courtroom rested in uncomfortable silence, the sort of silence that makes each second feel like an eternity. Kody sat tense at the defense table, looking directly ahead of him at nothing specific. His tie was loosened just a bit now, and his hands lay flat across the table as if he were pinning himself down, holding himself in place. His attorney leaned close to him and said something in his ear, but Kody didn't react. In the corner of the room, Christine, Janelle, and Meri huddled together, their faces impassive, but their bodies ever so slightly leaning toward one another, in solidarity of silent power. Robyn remained separated from them, her eyes cast at the floor, the photo of Garrison safely stowed away in her purse. And then, footsteps. The side door creaked open, and the jury entered one by one, their faces serious. Not one of them glanced at Kody as they found their seats. The foreman, a middle-aged, weary-eyed man, clutched a creased piece of paper in his hand. The judge's voice pierced the dense silence. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. The foreman moved forward, handed the document to the bailiff, who in turn handed it to the judge. The judge opened it slowly, agonizingly slowly, his eyes reading the words before he nodded. He handed it back to the foreman. The foreman stood and addressed the court. His voice was firm, but the gravity of it was impossible to deny. In the case of the individuals versus Kody Brown, we find the defendant guilty. The word crashed into the room like a hammer. Christine let out a hard breath, her hand shooting to her mouth. Janelle put her hand on Christine's arm and squeezed. Meri closed her eyes. as if she'd been carrying that moment around for years inside her. Kody didn't stir at first. He blinked, his eyes locked on the foreman, as if he hadn't quite registered the word. Then his jaw clenched, and his lips compressed into a tight white line. The judge's tones came swiftly after, hard and unbreakable. "Mr. Brown, you are remanded into custody and will be removed from this courtroom at once." There were gasps around the gallery. The scraping of chairs filled the air. 2 uniformed officers stepped up to the defense table. Kody rose slowly, his movements robotic, as if his body was moving without his mind's approval. He did not glance at his family. He did not glance at the jury. The first click of the handcuffs rang out brutally in the silence, followed by the second. Christine turned away, unable to bear it. Janelle gazed, unblinking. Robyn's head fell, her hair sweeping like a curtain across her face. The judge slammed the gavel again, its echo resonating through the wooden walls. "Court is adjourned." And that was it. Finished. But the silence afterward wasn't relief. It was the kind of silence after a storm, heavy, unsettled, full of things not said. The heavy courtroom doors swung shut behind Kody, the door closing, echoing down the hallway like the last note on a song nobody wanted to listen to. The cameras trailed behind him, reporters calling his name, but his head remained down. The chain of the handcuffs clanked with every step, each metal clang louder than the last. Within the courtroom, everyone remained frozen for a moment. It seemed that the very air had ceased to circulate. Christine remained motionless, gazing at the area where Kody had just been standing. Her tightly clasped hands in her lap relaxed. One tear fell down her face, not of sorrow, but of release. She leaned forward a little against Janelle and breathed softly enough that the microphones couldn't pick it up. "It's over." Janelle nodded, her eyes glassy, but her lips pressed into a determined line. Meri let out a deep breath, a sound half sob and half sigh, her shoulders finally sagging for the first time that day. Holding her place across the room, Robyn sat down. She didn't get up. She didn't say a word. Her fingers grasped the strap on her purse, where the photograph of Garrison had retreated once more. Her mouth shook, but no words passed through. She gazed down at the floor, her dark hair hanging forward to conceal her face from the room. But not from the cameras. The bailiff started shooing people out, the scuff of shoes and the groan of benches shattering the heavy quiet. Reporters slipped out the doors rapidly, hoping to be the first to break the news. Kody Brown, found guilty. Outside, the cold was a slap in the face. Christine, Janelle, and Meri stepped up onto the courthouse stairs as one, being blinded by flashes from cameras as microphones poked forward. "Christine, what do you think of the verdict? Do you believe justice was served? Will this be closure for your family?" They didn't respond. They glided in unison, passing by the commotion without a word, their faces impassive to the media, but telling a very different tale to anyone who really knew them. Robyn came last, by herself. She didn't talk to the press. She didn't even glance at them. Her step was slow, measured, as if every step weighed more than the previous one. Inside her head, the sound of Garrison's words on the back of that photo repeated endlessly. "I wish you had been there for me, Dad." That evening, the world was aware. Social media went into a frenzy within seconds. Hashtags were trending, videos re-showing the moment of the verdict from all possible vantage points. Comment sections were filled with arguments, sympathy, and anger. But within the Brown family, the din no longer counted. For them, it wasn't merely about a guilty verdict. It wasn't merely about legal justice. It was about years of cracks finally shattering totally. The fragments scattered so far they could never be assembled. The day had begun with tension, but it culminated in a creepy sort of quiet. Not peace, not yet, but the quiet that follows a storm. When the wind dies and the clouds rest heavy, choosing whether or not they're really done. Christine was home later that evening, staring out a black window, her reflection dim in the glass. She breathed softly to herself for the 100th time. It's over. But even as she spoke, she knew the truth. Some things end in a courtroom.